welcome to NDN. This is a it's a special day for NDN because we have a particularly distinguished and interesting and nice guest.
Thank you.
Francisco Sanchez, the Undersecretary of Commerce for International Affairs. As some of you know, I spent some time at Commerce, and he's got one of the hardest jobs in Washington right now, and one of the most important. You know, this town is mesmerized these days by political maneuvering over what to do about deficit projections 5 and 10 years from now. And that's the politics. It is kind of moving aside what are the real economic issues facing the country, which is not about deficit projections, but in particular about threats, much more immediate threats to the U.S. economy from rising oil prices, from a growing sovereign debt crisis in Europe, and from the economic aftershocks of the terrible disasters in Japan. Those are much more immediate and much realer threats to the U.S. economy right now. And then there is the underlying structural problem, which Americans keep on going to the polls and saying, if you don't address this, we will turn you out of power. They've done this 3 elections in a row, and that is we have had a decade of, by American standards, very anemic job creation and stagnating incomes. That's the central structural problem facing the U.S. economy today. We will deal with the deficit. We have done it. We did it in the 1980s. We did it in the 1990s. It is a 2 or 3 year process of political posturing and maneuvering until everybody converges on what we know to be the only ways to address them. The markets are confident we're going to do it. That's why long-term interest rates remain low. If there was any, if investors thought there was any real issue in the capacity of the U.S. political system to address these issues, we'd be seeing upward pressure on long-term interest rates. We're not. What is really central is coming to grips with the problems in job creation and income growth. And right at the center of that is the role of U.S. companies in the world. We are now not only in a global economy, we are the dominant economy in the global economy. We are the most highly globalized economy in the world. That is, we have a larger, much greater investments, foreign direct investments across the world, in particular across the most dynamic parts of the global economy in the developing world in Asia, where our foreign direct investments, as a share of our total foreign direct investments, are 3 to 4 times as great as Germany or France or Britain, even Britain. Europe is largely invested in itself. Its foreign direct investments are very highly concentrated in Europe and in the United States. The United States, U.S. companies have gone out across the world and invested across the world, and we've created these global networks. Well, this is in a period in which our incomes are growing slowly, our jobs are growing slowly, in which most Americans are struggling with a reduction in their net wealth from the end of the housing bubble. We have to look for sources of demand for U.S. jobs and U.S. goods, not just inside this economy, but outside this economy, and in particular. And I can't think of anyone more knowledgeable and in whom I would have more confidence to help lead that than Francisco. He has been a nationally known consultant. He has been an assistant secretary. He's been here before. He was assistant secretary for aviation at the Transportation Department under the great Clinton administration. He has been special assistant to the president. He is a very distinguished business leader. known in Washington and throughout the country. He's a great negotiator, teaches that. So he is right at the right place as the Undersecretary for International Trade and Commerce. It's my real pleasure and honor to introduce him today.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great. Thank you very much, Rob. And if you're not busy, if you could introduce me everywhere I go, I'll give you my travel schedule and we can do this together. Thank you for that gracious introduction. Let me just say something about our moderator today. There is no better critical thinker, particularly on economic issues and particularly the issue that we're going to focus on today, trade, than Rob Shapiro. And I'm very honored that he would be here to moderate this conversation, although I have to say with a little trepidation because he's quite capable, and I'm sure he'll demonstrate that today, of asking tough and penetrating questions. So you should be in for a real treat, not because my responses will be so brilliant, but because Rob will make sure that this is very interesting. So thank you for doing this. To NDN, to Simon and to Jake and everybody here, thank you for doing this. You do many important things. One of the important things you do is you bring together people to talk about important issues. And this one that we're going to talk about today is very, very important, precisely because of what Rob just talked about. We need to focus on job creation, and trade and exports are an important part of that equation. So I thank NDN and everybody here for recognizing the importance of that issue, and I thank all of you for taking time to be here. I'm going to try to be brief so we can have more of a conversation. Let me just say a few things on why this matters so much. I believe that in many ways American business has been fat, dumb, and happy with the domestic market. We have largely focused inward, and with good reason. We have the strongest economy in the world. A lot of opportunity here. We can't afford to do that anymore. Last year, the GDP, 50% of the growth in the GDP came from exports. When you have countries like China growing at 10%, Brazil growing at about 6.1%, India growing just under 10%, and I can go on and on and on. We cannot afford to think of our market as our local community, as our state, or even our nation. We have to think globally. And we think about job creation and well-paying jobs. Jobs tied to exports tend to pay between 15 and 18% more than the national average. So we're not just talking about creating any kind of job, we're talking about creating high-paying jobs. Now, if the growth rates of some of those countries don't impress you, then let me give you two other important numbers. 95% of the world's consumers live outside the United States. 95%. And increasingly, those consumers have money to spend. According to the IMF, nearly 87% of the economic growth in the world over the next 5 years will happen outside our borders. So we need to focus as part of our overall economic strategy on exports. And that's why President Obama announced about a year, almost a year and a half ago now, the National Export Initiative. And let me just touch briefly on a couple of the salient points of what this is. A president promoting exports is nothing new. There's nothing novel to it. As long as I've been on this earth, I can't think of a president that did not promote exports. So to be clear, that's not what's new here. But what President Obama did do is he elevated the importance of promoting exports and getting more American companies engaged to the very highest levels of government. And so what does that mean in practical terms? Well, he created the President's Export Promotion Cabinet, and he's holding accountable the members of that cabinet, which include a lot of his current cabinet in that. And he expects them and their undersecretaries and assistant secretaries, when they go abroad, to engage in commercial diplomacy. This is new. Before that, it was largely the responsibility of the Secretary of Commerce and me and others at the Department of Commerce, as well as the Department of State. But now it doesn't matter what cabinet member goes abroad. If they're attending a conference, they're also going to make visits to folks in that host country to talk about sometimes market access issues, but other times it could be to make a sale. We're getting very, very practical here. So he did that. He recognized that one issue that small businesses in particular have, and sometimes big businesses, is access to credit to finance their exports. So he gave SBA and XM tools that they need to try to help, particularly small businesses, engage in export. He's looking to the International Trade Administration, which I have the privilege of leading, to do a couple of things: increase export promotion and work even harder on what will really move the dial, which is moving market access barriers. And we're doing a lot of both. On the export promotion side, last year we took 35 trade missions to 31 countries. We had 400 companies participate. We have an international buyer program where we bring known buyers of American goods and services. We recruit them on their dime, but we recruit them to come to trade shows and trade fairs here. We had 13,000 of those buyers come to our shores last year. On the market access side, we work very closely with USTR, whether it's through the JCCT, which is the Joint Commission on Commerce and Trade, where we work through our trade and investment issues with China, whether it's the commercial dialogue that we have with Brazil, where we work on a number of market access issues, whether it's the commercial dialogue with India. We're focused on reducing barriers so that American companies have a better shot at selling their goods and services. This is critical, in my view, that we get this message out. Only 1% of American companies export. 1%. Compared to Germany, that has 12% of their companies exporting. And then another challenge is, of that 1%, 58% of those that do export to only one market. So if I had to net out what our most important task is at ITA, it's really twofold: getting more American companies to think about their market as a global marketplace, and as part of that, to not only think about one additional market or even a second additional market, but multiple markets. And then the next big piece of that is really focusing on lowering trade barriers. And to that end, we're using every tool we can. We have 3 pending trade agreements that I am very happy to say we have made tremendous progress on. Going back to November, the President directed his negotiating team to say, we have got to work on those issues that have continued to cause us problems. They did that, and they brought back a deal that we can now take to Congress, and we're ready for Congress to act on that. Panama, we started working with Panama on the remaining issues that we had. We still had some issues with them, and we made progress with them on a tax information exchange, on a banking code issue, and on a labor code issue. So we're very, very near to having Panama completed, done. I mean, really what's left is maybe dotting the I and crossing the T, but we're ready to move on that. Colombia, that many people thought Colombia would just be impossible to bring to Congress. I am very confident that we can bring all 3 of these to Congress this year. Colombia has a new president, and even before we started re-engaging them, this president has started making changes that matter to a lot of the stakeholders in the United States as it relates to the labor code. We now have a framework of an agreement on things that Colombia will do that address many of the concerns that we had as a government and many of our stakeholders do. And I think that we'll see Colombia go forward. So we're working using trade agreements. We're working with Mexico and Colombia on standards issues, on regulatory cooperation. It's very sexy to just focus on emerging markets, but let us not forget that 42% of all our exports from the United States go to countries in the Western Hemisphere. And a big chunk of those go to Canada and Mexico. And there are still things we can do to facilitate more trade among those countries. And so we're working on them. This is a critical issue because at the end of the day, it can create more jobs. I consider myself a trade evangelist. And when I go around the country now, I often speak to chambers of commerce with companies that have a product or a service that can absolutely be sold abroad. And I could write a book on the number of companies that I have met that 10 years ago were not selling anything overseas. And today, anywhere from 20 to 80% of their revenue is from overseas. And to a company, they will tell you, had they not made that leap, they would be out of business today. So with that, I will again thank NDN. Rob, thank you for being here, and thank all of you for having such an interest in this topic.
Let me pose a couple questions, and then we'll open it to the audience. What are the most important things that have to fall in place for the president, for us to achieve the president's goal of doubling exports over 5 years?
Well, as a noted economist, the first thing we looked at is what do we need to be growing exports by year to year over the next 5 years to achieve doubling. Most economists are saying we need to grow at about 14.5%. Last year we did 17%. The first 3 months of this year compared to the first 3 months of last year, we're up 15%. So we seem to be on the right track. I think in the short term, it is export promotion both domestically, meaning getting more companies to think about exports as part of their business strategy, and then helping them go abroad, whether it's through trade missions, whether it's through personalized services like the Gold Key that we have, whether it's attracting businesses here. Medium and long term, however, we can do all the export promotion we want, and it just won't move the dial. What really will move the dial is lowering barriers. So I think short to medium term, it's getting these trade agreements passed and operational. We've gotten them now where they are ready to go, and so I think that's important. And then medium to long term, it's chipping away, doing a lot of blocking and tackling on market access issues, whether it's intellectual property rights protection, whether it's transparency, particularly with companies that try to respond to government tenders, whether it's border facilitation issues, things where products get stuck at the border. Market access issues are really going to be the thing that drive an increase over the next 5 years.
I'm always struck by the data point, which I first heard from you, that only 1% of American companies are actually engaged in exports. You described a number of companies that moved from a purely domestic market to a more global market. What is it that the government can do to really facilitate that?
Well, there are a number of things we can do. I think the first and most important thing we can do is take the mystery out of exporting. I really do believe that there is a resistance because it's unknown, it looks complicated, it looks risky. So I think number one is working with the business community to take the mystery out of exporting. That's number one. Number two, we can help take a company that sees an opportunity, let's say in Spain. We can take that company to Spain. I'm just using Spain because it's the first country that came into my mind. We can take that company there either through a trade mission, or we can do an individualized plan for you for a nominal fee. It's what we call our gold service, where we'll interview you, understand your goals. Do you want to meet end users of your product or service? Do you want to find a distributor or a representative? What are the goals you're trying to accomplish? Once we know that, we have people on the ground in 77 countries. And they will go to work at putting together a dance card so that when you get off that airplane, you don't have to go through the yellow pages or talk to this person or that person. We've lined up the right people for you. So that's something else that we can do. Once you're in a country, if you've dipped your toe in the water and then you hit a stumbling block, let's say that you're having issues with getting your product through customs. We can work with you. If it's a market access issue, we will do our best to try to help you through that. So this and a number of other things, basic research is available. There's a lot of things that we can do. Trade fairs, matching people up at trade fairs, both Americans going abroad to selected fairs, as well as when we bring the international buyers here, connecting them with U.S. companies.
Well, I'm going to, as a captive audience, I'm going to give you a suggestion, which just occurred to me as we're talking. You know, I'm an economist, and so I'm always focused on data.
Yes.
It's always the problem whenever you're trying to figure something out is the availability of data. Well, your office is in a unique position to collect the data of best practices. Which companies have developed the best methods for penetrating different markets. And that could be an enormous treasure trove for other companies if we could collect those best practices and then share them, much as we did with the Manufacturing Extension Service. Yeah. Applying that kind of principle to the different challenges that companies face.
Are you charging me for this advice?
It's free. It's free.
I think it's a great idea, and one of the things that we are trying to do to provide better service is improve our technology. And I could imagine sharing those best practices, even having best practices stories each week or each month through our export.gov. So I think it's a great idea that we'll look to execute. Thank you.
I will say I've learned that it is good economics for me to never charge the government for anything. It always costs you more in the end. And leave it all to my private clients. And last question, and this is a harder one, and I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position, which I'm sure you can manage yourself anyway. Is there any prospect for Doha?
That's a very fair question. Like Doha, where we are today in terms of the countries that can really impact Doha, is a very different place from where we were when Doha started. And there have been studies that suggest that if we take the deal that's been on the table without any real changes, the benefit to the U.S. economy will be an increase in exports equal to 1 day of our exports. Now, I think we have enough with the 3 trade agreements to try to get them passed. To try to get a Doha deal through our Congress that only benefits us equal to 1 day of exports it's ludicrous. And so the administration has not given up on Doha, and we need to see leadership from all parties, from the U.S., but also from China, from Brazil, from India, some of the key players. You know, the other irony in this is if you take the deal as it is, truly emerging economies, and I consider China, Brazil, and India as somewhere between emerging and emerged, but truly emerging economies will not greatly benefit from what's on the table. So there needs to be some real changes there, and there needs to be some leadership. If we see that, then I'm optimistic. If we don't see any change, it doesn't look so good.
Well, and I won't ask you to comment on this, but it is, we really do have to figure out whether the global multilateral approach has really played itself out as more and more economic powers arise in the world and the negotiating process becomes incredibly burdensome, and find new mechanisms for expanding open trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob,
for coming, Secretary, and sharing all this with us. This has been fascinating.
Thank you.
For me, and I know for everyone else. But before we close, a few words from Simon Rosenberg, Chairman of NDN.
We're My dear leader.
We just may not fit. So I'll do this. Listen, everybody, thank you. Thank you to Rob. Thank you to the Undersecretary, who's an old friend, and it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
I just wanted to reflect just for 1 second on you know, we do a lot of work here in many different areas, but the work around how globalization is fundamentally changing everything that we know about geopolitics, about the way the economy here is developing, the way the economies around the world are developing, is really the bread and butter of our work, and has been for many, many years. I mean, for 15 years now that we've been in business. And I think in listening to the conversation today, and for those of you who've been at our events recently, we've had a lot of thought leaders in the American government really looking at the challenges of leading the United States in a very different economic age. Is that the theme that was running through much of what we discussed today is just how fundamentally different the world is today than it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And for us in the U.S., I think that the response of our economic elites and many of the policymakers has just simply been inadequate to the changes that are going on. And that what Rob discussed in the very beginning, and the core of our work, has been to really try to provide a more systemic, comprehensive response to a vastly changing world. And a world that so far has not, you know, in a very parochial way, has not benefited the American middle class at all over the last 10 years. We've seen declining wages and incomes. We are really struggling in many ways, despite the incredible success stories that we could tell about our companies that are increasing their exports and the doubling of the export, that America still hasn't figured out yet, I think, how to craft a response to the much more competitive global age. And I think that work of figuring that out is really what animates this organization every day, and it infects all of the work that we do here, particularly led by Rob. And I just want to say that what a great leader we have in Francisco Sanchez at Commerce, for really being on the front lines of some of the most incredibly important and intellectually interesting stuff about how we're really going to fashion the global economy of the 21st century, given all the new entrants. And I joke that for the United States, it's like all the kids have grown up. You know, they've got the keys to the car, they're not coming home at night, you know, they're staying out for a long time. And that is a fundamentally different world for us. And so it's not just about how we respond, it's also how we learn, I think, how to lead in a very different age where our leadership has to be fundamentally different. We saw that today in our very good friend Francisco Sanchez. So thanks to all of you for being here. Thank you. Good luck
Thank you, Simon.
on your trip to Latin America.
Thank you. Thank you.